we're, working with Common Crawl, who's, the partner that we just rolled out a structured data project and kind of AI agent with them. A key part of what you're looking for with structured data is getting insights, out of your raw data. And so we've actually been piloting this now with about a dozen enterprises. We're going to be rolling this out in the coming weeks, where there'll be real-time data aggregation of your social signals and be able to get structured data output. So informing you of sentiment changing around your brand or around competitors' brands. It's really about organizing the data and enabling the agent to more cost effectively or more quickly with less tokens get at the actual information that it needs to get out. The more garbage or unstructured information there is, in there, the less likely it is they're going to come to the correct answer. Markdown formatted information into RAG systems, significantly increases accuracy versus kind of unstructured data. So that's an area that we're sort of interested in. So as we think about like the long term of what we're doing, we really want to enable kind of an ever evolving set of kind of structured data, right? Markdown is sort of the newest, really important kind of format for these models. The transition of enterprise to being AI ready, like we're in not even the first inning of. Most of the large companies that we talk to.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we are joined by David Fields, a trailblazer in data structuring. As he dives into the realm of enterprise data management, David explores how transforming unstructured data into actionable insights can revolutionize business intelligence, highlighting the power of machine learning and social media analysis. He also delves into the strategic role of incentive mechanisms and partnerships in propelling DTAL progress. Now, back to David with the 37th Ventura Labs podcast.
All right, David Fields, round two. It's good to have you back, my man. How you doing today?
I'm good. Excited. Good to be back, man.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have had some big partnership announcements and developments since we last spoke. So I guess let's start high level here. What's your roadmap looking like?
Yeah, no, it's been obviously an exciting couple months. I mean, we're hitting the 2-month anniversary of DTAL, which in crypto and Bittensor years, feels like we're hitting the 2-year anniversary of it. But yeah, I mean, we've been really excited about the last number of months just to kind of set the stage. ReadyAI's mission is to structure the world's data and make it universally accessible for AI. And so what we've started with is really building a toolkit for enterprise, for individuals. We've built what's called our jobs interface, which you can go to on the ReadyAI.ai site. And there you can structure data, get metadata tags for any information, any data set that is either private or public on Hugging Face. You can get sentiment analysis, you can do custom tagging. And structured data is really what makes AI models and AI applications sing. And we can kind of get into that as we go along. The next kind of exciting tool that we're going to be rolling out for enterprise is really enabling a little bit more of an end-to-end product for a business. So a key part of what you're looking for with structured data is getting insights, out of your raw data. And so we've actually been piloting this now with about a dozen enterprises. We're going to be rolling this out, in the coming weeks, where there'll be real-time data aggregation of your social signals and be able to get structured data output. So informing you of sentiment changing around your brand or around competitors' brands. So we're pretty excited about that. We also, are excited about the importance of sort of data sets broadly in the AI space. We've been processing millions of lines of podcast data over the course of the subnet. So we're going to be launching some of these open source data sets over the coming weeks here as well. And we're working with Common Crawl, who's the partner that we just rolled out a structured data project and kind of AI agent with them. We're going to be working on some data sets with them as well, which we're really looking forward to. And really a core thing that we're trying to do is enable enterprises and businesses or individuals of any size to create the highest quality AI agents and applications to supercharge their business.
Well, that's it, folks. That's the podcast. Good job, David. Yeah, I mean that sounds like a great high level overview. And seriously, like anybody that doesn't want to listen to an hour, that was all they needed to hear, right?
Well, you
Um,
said to lay out the roadmap, up front. So wanted to give the highlights, gave the
yeah, I mean
TLDR.
you touched on absolutely everything there. Let's drill down on some specifics. What
Sounds good.
exactly are you guys getting data of right now and structuring?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things that were, I guess actually sort of three, but kind of two buckets of things. So we've been pulling in kind of a significant amount of and highly varied podcast data that's been structured by the subnet since inception. When we rolled out the jobs interface, that enabled people to start putting organic queries through the network. We rolled that out, a few months ago at this point. So we're seeing, quite a bit in terms of organic, Hugging Face data sets that are now being put in and metadata tagged, via the subnet. And we also started to populate some other Hugging Face data sets. We, worked with Subnet 13, the data universe guys. So they've been doing a lot of data aggregation of social media data, primarily on Twitter and Reddit. And so we've been doing some structured data set outputs of that. So if you think about raw data is obviously the first step. You need to aggregate raw data oftentimes as an enterprise. You want to pull in from a variety of different sources, kind of referencing your brand, competitors, other things you might be tracking. We see that as kind of the core of what Subnet 13 is doing, and then we're sort of the processing step where you're either processing that data to get insights directly, sentiment analysis, tagging of that data so you can organize it, for your RAG or AI model fine tuning as you kind of move forward. So yeah, so that's kind of the two buckets of things that we're doing. There's sort of the podcast data, which we're continuing to deliver as like an open source data set to push conversational AI forward. And then second is the organic queries and social media data that we're processing.
So on that organic query and social media dataset side, with 13, they're doing X and Reddit. So you just get a bunch of posts from X and Reddit. And then I guess the step you guys would be doing is you take that, you put it into a table, and you add a column for the tags.
Yeah, exactly. So we're tagging that data around sentiment, and we're also tagging it with its most relevant kind of metadata tags. So let's take an example. I mean, the podcast stuff is probably the most straightforward, right? On a podcast, you have Joe Rogan talking to, and we've processed many hours of Rogan's podcast, so it's a real example, right? He's talking to varied guests, and each of these conversations are broken up into windows where we're getting deep insights into what people are talking at within that conversation. And now you've got anywhere from 10 to 25 high quality tags around, okay, they're talking about bioweapons and and terrorism, and or they're talking about psychedelics, or they're talking about sports, and all that could in a Joe Rogan podcast be happening within the same conversation. So we're just providing a lot more metadata that can be valuable for whatever your purposes are as an AI model developer, or for RAG implementations. It's extremely useful.
And then in terms of structured versus unstructured data, where do you see the trend going? Because There has been significant growth with unstructured data and the popularity of that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that, data is just, has been for a long time, sort of digital gold, right? It's a very important part of, any business. I think there are a number of use cases where, for simplicity, for ease of use, people are going to want to just take an unstructured document, and be able to, just talk to that document, get information out of it, put that into the context window. Maybe taking sort of a step back just for, kind of to describe, some of this process, right? There's the context window of a model, gives you a certain amount of tokens that keeps expanding. I mean, Meta's latest is 10 million tokens, which is pretty significant. So you can put entire books, sort of just into the context window and get pretty good information out of it. There's lots of studies that look at the challenge of kind of accuracy of information via just a context window, because the more characters you're sort of putting, more tokens you're putting into the context window, it sort of creates challenges for the model to really get it at all of that information. If you're an enterprise, there's actually two challenges. One is around the accuracy. You want to ensure that any time one of your employees is, querying your model or your database, that they're getting an accurate response. Context windows can, significantly lower that, sort of the accuracy there of the data. And then maybe just as important, if not more important, is cost. When you're everything is priced in tokens with models. Everything, even your compute, if you're running your own compute, is effectively token based. So if you're running every single query against, let's use a simple example, which a lot of companies want to do, is like, they're all of their like employee handbooks, right? If you sort of have a 5 million token employee handbook, every single time that a user is querying that, you're spending the 5 million tokens to query that piece of information. Where if you instead take that information and vectorize it and put it into a vector database using a RAG implementation, you can cut that, query cost, down by, 100 or 1,000x. And so you're significantly lowering your costs, but you're also elevating the accuracy of the information. And so that's one example. I mean, as you sort of do more of the model development side, with model development, there is absolutely, there's sort of like two processes. There's like the, sort of the training of the model that's largely done initially on unstructured, but sort of, organized and pre-processed data. But then a lot of what's happening to really heighten the quality of these models is happening after that initial training run. It's being done in sort of more of the fine tuning step, where these kind of structured, structured data is really critical.
And then for the agent perspective, this would help because you could basically index like much larger things into a context window and then have it go like pick out that thing.
Yeah, I mean, for agents, in particular, it's really important for them, to have, the relevant context to what they're trying to do in each step in your agentic flow. And if you're, every time you're, sort of, well, so I guess there's sort of two things here. So one is like let's take the example of sort of AI agents that we've seen, on Twitter, right? Sort of the AI XBTs, sort of the world, right? There is a data fire hose, and I think a lot of us have kind of seen the challenges with it. I think AI XBT is probably the highest quality, outputs of these AI agents that we've seen, on Twitter. So not picking on it at all, but there are a number of times where the agent is providing incorrect information because there's a fire hose of Twitter that isn't actually kind of tagged or organized in a way that puts it into a category of, okay, this is relevant to X, Y, or Z, query or thing that I'm doing, or is this from a trusted source? So there's just a lot of processing of that data that is critical to ensure that it's not just garbage in, garbage out, that you're getting in sort of an agentic, in an agentic environment.
A way I'm thinking about it right now is an example of like a book. And so you would give the agent the chapter titles of the book, and then it would go pick the chapter specifically. Is that a correct way to think about it?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's really about organizing the data and enabling the agent to more cost effectively or more quickly with less tokens get at the actual information that it needs to get out. The more, you know, garbage or unstructured information there is, in there, the less likely it is they're going to come to the correct answer. And when you have agentic systems, if you're taking kind of 10 steps, as you go through like a deep research, process on ChatGPT, anywhere in those 10 steps, if something goes wrong, you're going to have a failure.
What do you see the primary use case of this being?
The primary use case of structured data.
Yeah, I was saying more so like this indexing factor with agents.
I mean, I think it's sort of the key piece to ensuring that kind of agents are going to deliver accurate end results, right? And with agentic systems, you're talking about having agents go and make purchases and sort of do things in the real world, and if that data that they're getting in isn't high quality, then you're going to end up with some problematic outcomes. And I think that's why you're seeing things like model context protocol, which is MCP, that Claude just announced, and has become quickly sort of a standard for a lot of agents. You're seeing that creating sort of standards or consistent ways in which information gets funneled into these agents is going to be critical to them successfully achieving their goals.
Is what you're doing similar to or can be applied to the agent flows of like Cursor and those type of tools?
I mean, Cursor is sort of, very specific to coding. So that's not really a domain that we're doing structured data around right now. But I think we are going to be doing some different sort of formats around structured data. So one that is really important in sort of the RAG system world is called Markdown. So feeding markdown formatted information, into RAG systems, significantly increases accuracy versus kind of unstructured, data. So that's an area that we're sort of interested in. So as we think about like the long term of what we're doing, we really want to enable kind of an ever evolving set of kind of structured data, right? Markdown is sort of the newest, really important kind of format for these models. But I think we're going to continuously see new ways in which and new sort of standards for how these data sets should be structured. And we want to continue to evolve the subnet to provide those outputs.
Yeah, expanding the subnet, it's podcast right now and Hugging Face data sets. How hard is it to take that next step and add these new, I guess, sources?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, right, like the core of Bittensor is around the incentive mechanism, and ensuring that you're enabling the connection between high quality sort of output and high score, and we've slowly sort of introduced the organic queries and sort of the Hugging Face data sets into that. We've now seen that be stable here for the last couple months, which is great. And so we want to continue to expand and sort of generalize how we can bring in that organic data. And so part of how we're going to be evolving the incentive mechanism will really be sort of bringing in sort of like a time dimension, so we're able to see how quickly these models can structure these data outputs not just right now, which is sort of more of a quality metric versus a sort of the kind of the broader context that the validator has. So we can go into a little bit more detail there, but I guess the simple answer is it's an evolution that's really about ensuring the incentive mechanism continues to align the quality of the result, the quality of the output, and the score that the miners are getting.
Have you seen a stabilization in your incentive mechanism? Like, has it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think, most subnet owners, right, we've been through, a number of, times where miners have figured out mechanisms by which they can game the incentive mechanism, in the early sort of, this is now many months ago, but, we were seeing people, able to do sort of tag stuffing and add, tags that didn't enhance the data set, but were able to sort of trick our incentive mechanism into giving it higher scores because it was the most relevant tag, and then they just like added an S to it or an ing or like anything. So as you sort of evolve, you see more of that play out. Miners are super important to the ecosystem and to what we're building. We've actually really been focused on growing our miner community. So we've announced some pretty cool things there in terms of this like miner optimization toolkit. We rolled that out, I guess, maybe like 10 days ago. We've already seen like 100 plus downloads of our Docker image on Docker Hub. It can now be run on anything from a Raspberry Pi to Mac, M Silicon. So, it's really flexible in terms of how quickly one click you can now get up and start mining. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Our miners are competing at a really high level. They're performing 50+% better than just kind of a GPT kind of 4.0 or kind of top end model for them. So it's still a very competitive landscape, but we just want to make the process of onboarding the best talent as easy as possible so they can start working on their models and their algorithms.
With onboarding customers, are you guys going to have to transition to a more privatized way of doing things to where people can upload proprietary data and get that tagged?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I mean, what we've really seen with enterprises, so we brought on a director of sales who came out of Microsoft and Deloitte just a couple months ago. We've really been ramping up sort of our enterprise sales outreach. My background is, I started my career at Disney. My co-founder sold his company, which was AdSense to Google. So we have a lot of sort of enterprise relationships, understand the importance of privacy and sort of data protection. And what we've really focused on strategically is we think that social media data and sort of a lot of publicly accessible data is highly valuable in kind of a structured, format to these businesses. And we're seeing that, with, a lot of what we've done. I mean, obviously, Common Crawl is another good example, right? All of their data is public data. So, we're not having to, look at customer data or more sensitive data, sort of flowing through the subnet. But we've, been from a evolution perspective, we're going to be very focused still over the next, number of months on kind of social media data as like the core thing we're going to monetize for enterprise. But we've been looking at, trusted execution environments. I know there's a few subnets, kind of looking to experiment there. We also think that there's a pretty exciting path with like privacy preserving tokens where businesses are basically doing sort of the anonymization of their data or working with us as a validator to do that before the data goes through to miners.
And with sticking to social media currently, the primary use cases for enterprise would be like sentiment analysis for their company and things of that nature.
I mean, there's a lot of signals that we think that you can derive from this, where you're ultimately doing customized tagging of information to see if there's something that might trigger a risk of losing a customer, or there's just a lot of kind of customization that I think these businesses can sort of utilize by pulling in a lot of that social signal. So you've seen some of the groups who are doing kind of the data aggregation layer around social, and I think there's some value to that. But sort of we think that there's even more value in like bringing insights to that data, and yeah, that's a big part of what we've been focused on here.
Would you relate it to almost as a wrapper in a sense on that the data aggregation layer?
Yeah, so I think you're going to see us launch, we're going to launch a product that effectively is like an end-to-end wrapper around, the subnet. So I think we're going to, enable businesses to use our pipeline directly, right? They can do that now. They can, ultimately there are free credits to start. And, we will be, selling that access, directly sort of via the validator. But we're also working with groups on how we can build out these AI models, for them, like we're doing with Common Crawl, and we're working with some others right now on that. And we look a lot at like sort of a Scale AI as kind of a model for like the business that we're building. So Scale AI has relied heavily on kind of human annotators primarily overseas, to do a lot of, the work for annotation. So the data privacy issue, I think, is a little bit more, nuanced than is sort of talked about at a high level, because we all know about GDPR and like all of these kind of data privacy rules. But businesses have been comfortable with their data on an anonymized basis being shared with individuals, who are working, hundreds of thousands of them, right, who are working as independent contractors, tagging this data, across the world. So we don't think that that's that big of a hill to climb, for a small amount of your data going out to individual miners, sort of on the network. And we've seen we've seen customers who understand that and kind of see the the analogy there. And then Scale has also been instrumental in working with a lot of these companies to structure that data for them and help build out these model systems. And so we've been doing that with Common Crawl. We're doing that with some others. So working with companies to leverage our structured data pipeline, but build on top of that. And then the final area, which is sort of what you were saying about a wrapper, is we also want to enable like really seamless products, for end users to utilize, and they don't even necessarily have to be aware that Bittensor is under the hood, but the data processing is all happening via the subnet.
And then the partnership with Common Crawl, what exactly does that look like? How is that relationship defined?
Yeah, so we, had a really good conversation with them just about, kind of what we had been doing, and sort of how we could leverage our structured data to provide a better resource, for their company. They have moderators who are sort of working to provide insights to, AI researchers around the clock. And we took all of their data, a lot of it's from, sort of public stuff, We took data from their listserv and from their Discord, from the crawl itself, and we were able to provide a model to them, based on the structured data that we did with the subnet, that was delivering highly accurate, information, to their, to their researchers. So that now has sort of a real time updating feed. So we're pulling new information, as it comes out on the listserv and the Discord, and structuring that data, putting it in if it's relevant, into the vector database. So we're, effectively have, kind of built out an AI agent system for them. The model lives on their site. It now also, lives on Discord and Slack for them.
Are there any sectors that want the structured data more than others, like financial, AI researchers? Are you seeing any sectors like that are really heavily interested?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say sort of on the enterprise side, there's we're talking to, well, I sort of was alluding a little bit to this yesterday, but we really are I'd say we're in the phase of also showcasing to the world like what structured data can do. So Common Crawl was a great partner to be able to say, okay, here's how we can enable, a really highly accurate, high quality model and resource like for your community. We've been working, with one of the leading creators on crypto Twitter. We think we're going to put out one of, if not the most sort of interesting, high quality AI agent, sort of in the vein of like an AI XBT. That's something that we've been working on for the last, couple months. So that's pulling in lots of social media data. It's pulling in, on-chain data. So we want to keep enhancing the capabilities of and really showcasing to the world what you can do with structured data and, how we can help you accelerate your goals kind of with that.
And this AI agent is going to be ReadyAI's AI agent, or you're doing it
No,
for?
this will be this creator's agent that we're powering.
Okay. All right. I don't want to pry too much into the details there. I don't
Yeah,
know if
we're
you're
not ready,
ready to
not
make
ready
that
to
announcement.
announce that just yet, but yeah, in the next couple of weeks we'll we'll be talking about that a lot more.
There you go. And over the past couple of weeks, DTAL has been live. So, what have been your thoughts on DTAL?
On DTAL. So yeah, I mean, look, I think it's gone really well, so far. I mean, it was a massive, sort of 2.0 upgrade to the chain. Hats off to, OTF for, for doing a masterful job, kind of doing that transition technically. And I think we sort of felt, and I think there were others who I was talking to on the subnet, kind of owner side. The first like 30 to 60 days in particular were going to be very volatile. It's extremely low liquidity. These are fair launch tokens. So, we sort of said, all right, we're going to be heads down. We're going to build. Let's really start to roll out what we've been working on publicly, as we're like 45 days into it. Because I think there was just so much downward, price pressure and low liquidity. Like it really wasn't, I don't think it was great to sort of be um, too aggressively public about what you were doing. Now that there's a lot more liquidity, the market stabilized, some of prices is now in a, really healthy spot. You've seen us, be a lot more active, and you're going to continue to see us be really active in terms of how we, push forward what we're doing with the subnet. But we've been really excited. I think it's all, we've gotten through that tough. We're almost 60 days into it, so I think we're coming out the other side, and I expect a lot of strength from this point on.
Yeah, you mentioned two things there that I want to ask you about. Summer prices this morning hit 2.04 for I know that. And then if you include the ones that are like pre-start phase, we're way crazier. But also you touched on being too aggressive too early because of the downward pressure, and that's because of tau weight, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Root proportion. So yeah, I mean, do you want, yeah, I can kind of go in order there, but yeah, I mean, some of prices, that's been, I think, one of the most talked about metrics. I think it's a really important metric. Um, it in the early days, I think everyone was convinced that things would sort of converge to one or might even dip lower than one because of the interconnection of these 2 points, right? The tau weight or the root proportion. When the network moved to DTAL, 100% on day one, minute one, 100% of all of the rewards to validators went to the root validators and their delegators, and all of that was instantly sold back into Tau. So all of the alpha tokens had this pricing pressure, downward pressure on it in a very low liquid environment. So yeah, that just that and to put a finer sort of point on it, that over 60 days now, I looked at it yesterday. Each subnet's like slightly different in this, but roughly like we were at 40% now alpha proportion and 60% root proportion versus it was 100% root and zero alpha 60 days ago, and it'll be 50-50 within probably like 15 to 20 days. And I think what you're seeing with some of prices is, in my view, kind of two things, which one is, fantastic for the network. I think that you're seeing that people are valuing the subnets as more than just, the sum of Bittensor. They're giving value, they're attributing value to the outputs, to the commodities that, the subnets are producing. And that's exactly what, we sort of need to see, that individually subnets are executing and providing value to this network. And so if that continues to go up, I think it's showing more and more confidence that the subnet tokens themselves have value. Because if subnet token prices equal one, that basically just means that the sum total is just the value of Bittensor. So I think that's really great. We're still in a low liquidity environment that's going to be volatile. I could easily see it going meaningfully up, crashing down. I think I think you're seeing a lot of volume of like day traders now on the network. So yeah, there'll probably continue to be some volatility there, but I think it's a really positive sign for the network's health.
do you think as the majority of these subnets reach the alpha weight being greater than the tau weight, we'll see the sum of prices continue to appreciate, or do you think we'll see it stabilize, or what do you think that will look like?
Yeah, I don't think there's nothing in the design of DTAL that pulls prices back to one. And I think there's a little bit of there are so many tweaks to DTAL as it made its way towards launch. And one of them actually was this change where there was a like there was actually in the protocol a way in which things did start to push back down to sum of prices equals one, but they removed that. There is no cap on it, but there are ways in which it's not, like it'll just always go up and to the right. They like there are, it's a natural free market, and I think that was a much better outcome, for Bittensor for the long term. But right now you can get very significant APRs on alpha tokens, but I think it's really important because I don't know that this is talked about as much. I know Mog, I think he's been really good at trying to keep everyone grounded about what APRs mean in DTAL, because APRs are just so much more volatile in DTAL because it can change dramatically with how much alpha is staked. if like the amount of alpha that's staked to a specific subnet doubles, your APR will then cut in half, which isn't a bad thing because your price will have gone up, but it's complicated. I think it's a really brilliant design, but it is complicated, and I think it's a little, it's harder to wrap your head around exactly what that's going to mean for, price over the medium to long term. But I think things are in a pretty healthy spot right now. And what do you think, Grant?
I have too many opinions on detail, to be frank. Um, I guess I'd ask you next, how does it change your operations, if at all, now that it has became live?
Yeah, I mean, not much other than, uh, you know, basically talking to the team about, look, the first, 60 to 90 days, like, let's not think about, price token, like really not important. We're not, we have no plans on selling our tokens, at this point. We're really excited about the long-term potential here. But it's also like every crypto project sort of goes through this, you now have a live, price on your token and it's very low liquidity. And so it's gonna, could go up a lot one day, could go down a lot one day. And, fundamentally, we're very excited about the long term here. We think data, may be the most important piece of, what makes AI so powerful. It's definitely one of the, kind of core components. And, we think, we've been excited about, what we've been able to do so far and have a lot more we want to accomplish.
Yeah, and speaking of long term, um, data is the base layer of the stack, right? Nothing else, no inference can't happen if the model wasn't trained on data, right? So, I mean, I guess long term, what are your goals like 5, 10 years out if you guys plan that far? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of our long-term goals, I laid some of this out at the beginning, but we really want to, we want to enable all the world's data, to be AI ready, and so some of that, we're doing via these, open source large scale data sets that we think add to, what AI model developers, especially in the open source community, can do. We also think that the transition of enterprise to being AI ready, like we're in, like, not even the first inning of. Most of the large companies that we talk to, we're so in the weeds on AI, and I think we were a bit surprised, at this ourselves when we started having some of these conversations months ago. Companies move slowly. They have, embedded systems. They do have concerns over, their data privacy, and not just their data privacy, but even like how do we interface with models and companies like OpenAI who, have shown that they don't value data privacy or, data ownership. They're training their models on people's data. So, how can we share our data in their ecosystem? And so I think we're still very, very, very early in, how enterprise are going to interface with AI and getting their data, from years and years and years of systems, that are in various kind of data warehousing, across the web, to a seamless experience where any employee of various, kind of levels can have access credentials and, be able to see insights across the company. I mean, that's kind of what I think every enterprise wants to get to, and they're in the first inning of figuring all that out. So, we're really excited about, what this is going to mean for us and the future of structured data and AI.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're saying these companies, it's still so early for them. And it seems like you're saying they have the data, but they don't necessarily know how to apply it or know what to apply it to.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, every company, has, tons and tons and tons of data. Most of it lives in a variety of different, systems. It lives siloed off in different business units. It lives on one employee's, computer, right? And the CEO or manager, may not have, kind of access or those insights. So I think that's what every enterprise wants to get to a point where they can give, you know, whoever should have sort of that authority. Let's start at the top at a CEO or manager. Enable them to have a system where they can have full insights across what's going on at the company at any level, and that see through to what's going on across the organization has always been like the biggest challenge of large organizations. I mean, when I was at Disney, I worked in I worked in a corporate group that did all of the M&A and strategy across the company. I worked really closely with the senior team, the CEO and CFO. Worked on like the Pixar deal, and we acquired that. And the biggest challenge, that the C-suite would talk about is like, how do we actually get at the information that's happening on the ground at the amusement parks, there's information that's happening in real time at sort of the most foundational level of your company that's often hard to get at. And I think the promise of AI is it's really going to enable businesses to be a lot more agile and react much more quickly.
I'll wrap it up with this last question here. With I guess what advice would you have for subnets in focusing on horizontally expanding instead of vertically integrating? Instead of trying to attack all layers of something, they monopolize essentially one part of the stack, like you guys are trying to do here with data. What advice would you have for them on horizontal expansion in the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I've been talking, with a number of other subnet owners. I think there's been a meaningful shift that hasn't been talked about sort of enough in Bittensor, where there a lot of how we've been designing subnets has been to enable validators, to get access to the commodity that subnet produces. But with DTAL, it started to become pretty clear. Well, okay, you now need to hold the alpha token, or be a validator that's getting delegated the alpha token. Like that's where all of the weight is going to come from. And now, us and most subnets, right? We're the largest validator, on our subnet, and subnet owners are really the ones who are expected to monetize, the commodities coming out of their subnets. And I think even for groups like us, where yes, we're providing a lot of this horizontal, sort of infrastructure, and and any validator could leverage, kind of that digital commodity. Enterprises can come in and sort of get access to that digital commodity via our validator. But we also think we need to build some of this vertical, products that sit on top of it, where, there are probably dozens of companies around the world that should be making their own foundation models. There are, millions upon millions of businesses that should be building out vector databases and RAG systems that they can leverage for their business insights. And so, we're seeing more and more that like that's the big unserved market, that we want to keep addressing.
Well, David, always a pleasure chatting. Thank you.
Grant, this is great. Thanks for having me.